Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
School is out for the summer, so let the fun begin, right? Not quite everyone gets the quintessential summer vacation as we knew growing up. Many things continue to run in the background, of course, during summer fun. Things like policy making, and business is no exception. But we'll look at those issues that matter most with Ted Pitts of the South Carolina Chamber and Banner Elk Mayor Brenda Lyerly. And later on, the Chief Executive Officer of North Carolina's Electric Co-ops, Joe Brannan, joins the dialogue.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ted Pitts from the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, Mayor Brenda Lyerly of Banner Elk, and special guest Joe Brannan, Executive Vice President and CEO of North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives.
Welcome to our program. Sometimes all the best dialogue happens before the cameras roll. We're laughing and something we talked about earlier. Mayor, welcome. Ted, good to have you here again.
Good to be here.
So as we head into the summer, Ted, I almost don't know where to start, but you know, one of the neat things, and it might be a marquee issue, it's certainly a sports-related issue, and that's the idea that the Carolina Panthers are relocating now officially. We all know that now. Headquarters from Charlotte to Rock Hill in York County. Is that a story about economic development? Is that a story about tax reform? Is that a story that the Panthers want to be known as the Carolina Panthers? What is that about?
I think it's a couple things. First is, you know, regionally, when you look at regions, a lot of times they don't see state borders. So when you look at the Charlotte, York, Lancaster, down I-77 region, you know, they're all in the same MSA, and it's one of the fastest growing MSAs in the country. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you look at the Panthers, they are the Carolina Panthers, not the North Carolina or the South Carolina Panthers. I think it makes a lot of sense on a lot of fronts, and it's really a big win for South Carolina to have a pro football team now headquartered in South Carolina, and Rock Hill is a great place for that to happen. Could
this be something like Jerry's World outside of Dallas, where it becomes an entertainment complex on its own?
Yeah, so I've toured the Star in Frisco, Texas, yeah, which is Frisco, Texas, not Dallas, Texas. And I'll tell you, it is a draw, and there is a lot of economic activity that goes along around that facility. So I think, you know, they've called it a mini Star. You know, I think it's going to have the same impact on Rock Hill, South Carolina that the Star has had on Frisco. And, you know, Rock Hill's already, we refer to it as, you know, Football Town USA. You know, a lot of great players have come out of that region of the state, and really from a national perspective, and everybody always goes immediately to Jadeveon Clowney. Yeah. Just a lot of folks have come out of that region. I think it's a good fit.
Yeah, you think we end up, I promise, Mayor, I'm going to include you in this dialogue. Do you think a lot of the players start to think twice about where they're going to put their residence then?
So I think one thing that's important is North Carolina has addressed tax reform. And has a very competitive environment. And some of the incentives that we had to offer on the South Carolina side of the line to make the move happen included trying to level the playing field. So South Carolina policymakers need to take this seriously, and it's time to tackle comprehensive tax reform. And I think it will affect decisions on where people live. So we're hopeful that the General Assembly and the governor has definitely, they've talked about it. We're hopefully finally they'll roll their sleeves up and, and address the issue of tax reform, which not only affects the Carolina Panthers, but it affects small mom and pop businesses, South Carolinians, is something that we need to do.
Mayor Lyerly, when you hear us talking about these issues around an urban core like Charlotte, Rock Hill, MSA, does it resonate with you, or you go, you know, in Avery County and in Banner Elk, the issues are completely different?
No, I think we're a microcosm of the big picture as well. Economy is driven by the decisions you make and how things are decided, just like he was saying. So,
does Banner Elk identify with, and this is not meant to be a Chamber of Commerce discussion, but does Banner Elk identify with Boone and Blowing Rock, the more western part of the state, or is it, or are you on your own and you say, no, we're Banner Elk, home of Lees McRae, home of a lot of great homes, and et cetera, et cetera?
all of the above. We consider ourselves part of the high country, and we know that when people come to Banner Elk, they also want to go to Grandfather Mountain. They want to see the different aspects of the beauty of our area. That's the reason they come. So we all benefit from their coming to our area. We have a lot of people who went to Appalachian State University or Lees McRae, and they want to stay in the area. Maybe not just Banner Elk, but they want to stay in the area and continue to come to Banner Elk as well.
And one of the smaller policy things, but nonetheless painful in towns like Banner Elk, is the idea that the ABC stores, or the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission for North Carolina, is under a lot of scrutiny, which could mean privatization. If that happens, smaller communities like Banner Elk will be on the losing end of that from education funding. Is that correct? Is that the right way to say it?
Not education funding. We are allocated so much. There are 3 municipalities we own our own ABC store. And each of us, each year, each municipality gets $85,000 from that. And on top of that, there's education monies that are allocated for our area, for the schools, and also for rehabilitation and all of those things. So there's a lot of money at stake here.
Would you predict that ABC store shuffle is going to happen?
I'm not going to predict that, simply because anything can happen between now and then. I know there are big lobbies who are interested in changing this into where you can buy liquor anywhere. But it's a security thing too. We feel as if anybody can go to the drugstore and buy alcohol, or at any time of the day or night, that they might not be carded. It may be that the alcohol gets into the wrong hands, whatever. Right. It's at the present time, it's more secure. But I know that things are changing in that there are more distilleries, and the distilleries are now getting into the act.
And we're talking about legal distilleries, right?
Yes, legal distilleries.
Not that that's ever happened here in the South.
Right, not at all. But these distilleries would like to be able to have people to come in there, taste their alcohol, and sell them alcohol. The way things are presently, that's not going to happen.
Some other big policy, and the mayor talked about a little bit around education, Ted, is the State House. North Carolina is still going through their session, but the State House short session is up. Do you feel like the education reform that was highly talked about at the beginning of the session ever came to fruition?
So the House passed a bill, a pretty comprehensive package. Speaker Lucas led that charge. It's over in the Senate, so this past year was the first year of a 2-year session. So I think the business community is hopeful that senators are going to take the time and look at what reforms we can implement that actually will improve the education system for all students.
Is it about teacher pay? Is it about funding districts? Is it about taking low-performing districts and rolling them up into higher performing? What's the issue?
So when you look at teacher pay, a teacher pay increase was actually included in the budget that the governor just signed. So that's a good thing. You know, recruiting and retaining the top talent. You know, we know the most important thing is to have a good leader in front of a classroom, and that starts and ends with a great qualified teacher. So the pay raise was in the budget. We're hopeful that when you look at some other reforms that need to be made, you know, there's a lot of talk about testing. The business community believes testing is important, There is probably too much testing, so we need to figure out which tests actually add value or provide feedback that's needed and which tests are not needed. So I think that's something that's going to get a lot of debate.
You know, I wasn't prepared for the comment. I don't think it was a teacher, but it was an educator for sure that said it's not so much about teacher pay. Yes, that's important. But it's the idea of the level of compliance now that educators are facing with 504s and IEPs, and they're all important in different types of testing, and also their school has a certain type of way they're doing things, and they've got to do things according to the state. So it's this huge ball of compliance that now teachers and principals and educators have to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, to be a teacher now, you're not just educating students. There's a lot of paperwork involved. And I think we're hopeful that we can find a way to get the teacher back to where they can spend more time teaching and less time on paperwork. But, you know, when you look at the system as a whole, there are some changes that need to be made. And Act 388 is something that gets talked about with school funding. You know, the Chamber Foundation, we're looking to undertake a project to bring the Lincoln Institute in and look at property taxes and what it's done to education funding and just taxes in general. And so we're hopeful some of those issues can be addressed.
Yeah, okay. We're out of time. We're going to bring our guest on. Stay with us. Next week on this program, or rather coming up on this program, is Frank Emery. Frank is the chair of what is called EDPNC. It stands for Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. They work in conjunction with the Department of Commerce in North Carolina and are where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, on economic development. Frank Emery is the chair of that. Also coming up is Dr. Patrick Cawley. Dr. Cawley is the president of MUSC and will join us on this program as well. And John McConnell as well from McConnell Gulf will be on this program coming up. While the nation's largest public utilities, like Duke Energy, like Dominion, battle it out for large market share and profitability, the electric co-ops in small and rural communities do very well, thank you, with almost 50 such electric co-ops in both North and South Carolina. They cover approximately 4 million customers in both states. Joining us now is the CEO of the North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, Joe Brannan. Joe, welcome to the program.
Chris, thank you. I appreciate it.
You know, when you've got all the headlines, not all the headlines, Joe, but a lot of headlines about Duke Energy, about Dominion, about Santee Cooper, et cetera, and you're operating almost out of the purview of a lot of the higher, and I don't mean this in any other way, to say you can almost be a little bit more nimble in the fact that you're in the smaller and rural communities, but is it hard to get all of your members on the same page about policy, distribution, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think your point about being nimble is very important. And the way we like to look at it from a standpoint of cooperatives, because we have the opportunity and the privilege to serve in rural communities, we're really focused on those that are in the community. And the ability to focus on what the consumer needs are and then work that through the process, which, as you just mentioned, through our membership, allows people to come to a conclusion on what's best for the consumer. It allows us to work through some of these policy discussions in a shorter time frame, and that then helps us really work with some of the policymakers in the states and also other constituents. It's not just about the policymakers. There's a lot of other groups that would like to see things change, and they have opinions and thoughts, and it allows us to really develop a kind of a coalition of thought that really starts from the membership, the member consumer, works its way through the membership and into the hands of the leadership, and then thus the conversations with the policymakers.
And then do you still have the level of compliance and rigor of facing the public utility staff, in your case in North Carolina?
So I think the rigor of compliance, let me take it a little broader. As an electric utility, we have to fall under all the compliance that's necessary to perform in this industry. And today, just like we were talking about before with teachers and compliance continues to increase and become more complex, and obviously with that comes cost. But from the standpoint of a Public Utility Commission and the regulatory framework, from a cooperative standpoint, that falls on the boards of directors for the electric co-ops.
So self-policing to some degree?
Self-regulating.
Self-regulating.
And what we end up doing, and I know a lot of people think about self-regulating and think, oh, well, that flexibility allows you to do anything. And in reality, it doesn't. You still have to meet certain requirements. But I also think that board of directors is a board that's elected from the community. And because they're elected from the community, they really bring the community view into the boardroom, and it allows them to provide the appropriate oversight for the organization and decision making as well.
Ted, question?
Yeah, so you look at what businesses now are talking about. A lot of times they're talking about, limiting their carbon footprint and renewable energy. What sort of renewable initiatives or market trends have you seen from your seat?
That's a tremendous question. I think today, not only regionally and in this country, but across the globe, there's a heavy focus on what we'll say carbon footprint. And renewables over the last 10 years has really become a mainstay, I think more so than a trend. And what we're seeing from a renewable standpoint, in particular in the Carolinas, is focused heavily on solar. And you ask yourself, why solar? Well, particularly in the Carolinas, what we see is there's a great interest. There was actually some policy that was implemented several years ago that allowed for, I'll call it an incubation process to allow solar to get some traction. But one of the key things about solar that I like to think about is if the individual can understand the technology, we've done a tremendous job in creating awareness. And then we have to work through education. And one of the things with education really comes about when you implement solar. So there's different ways to implement solar. One of the approaches the cooperatives have taken is what's called community solar. And in reality, if you're serving the community, take the solar to the community and then apply it, and then let them learn, reap some of the benefits that are there. So I would say right now, it's a building block. We've seen from a standpoint of smaller areas, community solar is a focal point. We've also seen utility scale solar, which are the large solar farms throughout both states. One of the things with utility scale solar requires a lot of land. And so if landowners are comfortable with that, it's great. If they're not comfortable, it's a little bit more of an obstacle. The other, which is really trending, and I think it really comes down to the individual consumer to make this decision, is what people talk about rooftop solar. And one of the things that I always try to point out is with any technology, you have to find where is it best applied. And rooftop solar is not for everybody. And so having all these options for, in particular, solar, from utility scale, community solar, as well as rooftop, I think there are many options for us to explore and meet the consumer's needs.
Mayor?
I saw an electric car not too long ago with solar panels on the roof.
Right.
I had never seen that before. And as we know, electric cars are presumed to be the future. And getting away from gasoline. So what are the logistics about, and how are you preparing for the solar plug-ins at rest stops? I did see at the Biltmore Hotel, they already have plug-ins. And I know that Biltmore would pay for that electricity. Who's going to pay for the other hookups?
That's a really good question. Let me take a little bit of a step back, because what I think both you and Ted are really focused on is where is the consumer today? And what we try to do is think about the consumer and what's happening to and with the consumer. And so right now, new and advanced technologies are really a catalyst for change. But one of the key things, and it's fundamental to what we look at, is the consumer behavior. And I can boil it down to 3 attributes: cost, control, and convenience. And so when we talk about electric vehicles, there's a convenience and there's a control aspect that people want. And when we think about a transition in transportation, we have a tremendous infrastructure across the United States that currently serves a fossil-based transportation system. So as you transition to something that's non-fossil based, and more importantly, you're taking it into the home, because close to 80% of any charging for electric vehicles is going to take place at the home. So as we transition and think about charging infrastructure, you had mentioned the Biltmore and public charging stations, if you will. I like to think about public charging stations as an opportunity to create awareness. And we create the awareness of the capability to charge a vehicle along a route so that you don't have anxiety that I'm going to run out of charge and I'll be stranded somewhere. And so I think that first step is awareness, very important. The other part is really to take and move into education. what is an electric vehicle versus a fossil-based vehicle? Everybody's familiar with their gasoline-powered cars, but an electric vehicle has many attributes, some of which are obvious. It's the emissions focus on electric vehicles. The other it speaks to the consumer control. If I can go home and charge when I want, but at a rate that's much more affordable than a gasoline-based, I've taken control of my income stream, my spending. Now they want that at home. So from a utility standpoint, we're trying to address those needs in a way that we can help with the control attribute, the convenience because it's at home. But the other is it's a change in the infrastructure from an electric standpoint. We're moving from something that's been in place for many decades to providing more capability at home. And so you'll see things where we have educational material to tell you what to do at home, what type of chargers make sense for the type of vehicle you have. But one other aspect that I think is back to Ted's point about trending, it's very important. The auto manufacturer's decision to commit to electric vehicles is paramount. It's not that they're trending, they're committing. And because of that, the infrastructure will change, and we will see that the infrastructure will be in place to allow for a consumer to feel comfortable with their choice, and not only comfortable, but they feel like they are now in control.
So Joe, how do you break out this, I'm going to just call it the Tesla effect? It's a brand.
Yes.
It's a guy with a Twitter account.
Right.
It's all those things. It seems like in the early days, Tesla was great for the EV industry, but now maybe not so much, just because of kind of the hot water they found themselves in with the SEC and maybe the production levels, et cetera, et cetera. So does Tesla help or hurt, or is there something that we're not thinking about because we're overshadowed by, well, I don't want to buy a Tesla because I don't like that CEO, or I do want to because I like that CEO?
I think the Tesla effect is a great way to capture what's happening. Anytime you introduce a new technology, you have to ask yourself, how do I raise the awareness? And some people, I'm not the marketer, but they'd use words like, how do you create a pop? Tesla created the pop. And what they were able to do is they were able to take a mindset that was focused on a gas-powered engine and dramatically move it to an alternative. But the way in which they approached that was not through the car, but through technology. And it played right into the mainstream of this country. The mainstream in this country is very heavily focused on technological advances and how technology can make my life better. They played right into that, very wise, and then they moved people's perspectives, and then they settled in on the electric vehicle. But Tesla is also involved in battery packs, beyond just the electric vehicle, but battery packs for the home. So what I think Tesla was able to do is shift perspective, a consumer perspective. Now that it's been shifted, you see a lot of other companies coming in to take advantage of it. And I think the consumer decision on do I want a Tesla or not is really going to come down to brand, to your point, Chris. But I don't think it's do I want an electric vehicle or not. It's just do I want a Tesla or not. So it's really turned it into branding versus the actual vehicle. Okay. And some would say that he allowed, if you will, the electric vehicle transition to take place because of the heavy push on technology.
Okay, we have a minute left.
Yeah, so rural North Carolina and rural South Carolina, a lot of your customers.
Correct.
When you look at, we talked about consumers, what trends do you see that are different between a larger metropolitan area versus what rural North Carolina and South Carolina, what those consumers are thinking and wanting?
I would say I'll break down into two areas. One is a consumer is a consumer. And the three behavioral attributes I mentioned on control, cost, and convenience are pervasive, whether you're in urban or rural areas. I think the other aspect is where the emphasis is on one of those three. And what we see is in certain more populated areas, there's more of an aptitude to try some new things in a shorter period of time. And I think in certain rural areas, there's more of a apprehension to try some of those. And I think part of that is driven by the unknown. What cost will that I have to bear to transition? I do see that in more rural areas versus urban areas, there's
about 15 seconds.
a greater emphasis on controlling my energy cost. And I would say that's paramount to what we do as cooperatives, is to provide the tools in order to allow them to control their energy cost so they have greater amount of discretionary income.
You drive an electric car?
I have a hybrid.
Yeah, a smart man, playing both sides. You're good. That was a good answer. Thanks for being on the program.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I appreciate joining you both. Thank you.
Mayor, good to see you. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
Always nice to have you on the program, Ted. Nice to see you. Thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris Williams. If you have any questions or comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. You can watch programs as well. Good night. Have a good weekend.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sonoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.